crazy.
Chet Huntley, David Benson, John Chen.
Tom Brokaw.
Guilty in the Enron collapse. Former executives Lay and Skilling convicted of conspiracy and fraud in one of the biggest corporate scandals ever. Who's America? A showdown looming tonight in Congress over a new immigration law. In the border wars, is there a middle ground? Housing on the bubble. A growing number of homeowners paying a heavy price for mortgages they can't afford. And the next big thing from the man who brought the world the iPod and the personal computer.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams. Substituting tonight, Campbell Brown.
Good evening. At the time, it was the biggest corporate collapse in American history. And tonight, a major victory for government prosecutors and vindication for the former employees of the bankrupt Enron Corporation. In a Houston courtroom today, the judge read the verdicts aloud. It was guilty for the top two Enron executives. Ken Lay, Enron's founder, was convicted on all 6 counts against him, including wire and securities fraud. He was then separately found guilty of bank fraud. Former CEO Jeffrey Skilling was convicted on 19 of 28 counts against him, including fraud, conspiracy, insider trading, and lying to auditors. We have 2 reports tonight on the verdicts and the reaction. We begin with CNBC's Scott Cohen in Houston. Scott, good evening.
Good evening, Campbell. Nearly 5 years after the corporate collapse that shocked the world, it took the jury just about 5 days to render its verdict. And now a man who once was on top of the corporate world has hit bottom. Once bound for corporate glory, Ken Lay, the founder of Enron, is now bound for federal prison.
Certainly this was not the outcome we expected. I firmly believe I'm innocent of the charges against me, as I have said from day one.
But the jury disagreed. Ken Lay guilty on all counts, and in a separate trial, a judge ruled him guilty on 4 counts of bank fraud. His wife weeping at his side, Lay turned ashen as the verdicts were read.
Certainly we're surprised. I think probably even more appropriately to say we're shocked.
Jeff Skilling, the former consultant who built Enron's business, then resigned after just 6 months as CEO, guilty too.
Obviously, I'm disappointed, but that's the way the system works.
The collapse of Enron less than 3 months after the September 11th attacks set off a crisis in business confidence and a wave of corporate scandals. Enron was the most complicated of all. For 4 months, jurors slogged through it all, learning arcane terms like raptors, special purpose entity, and goodwill write-down. But in the end, for jurors, it came down to truth versus lies.
I think all the evidence pointed that they were guilty of the charges committed. The defense presented their case well. So did the prosecution.
Lay claimed whatever fraud was going on at Enron was going on behind his back. But at the Justice Department, they say he's still responsible.
The message of today's verdict is simple. Our criminal laws will be enforced just as vigorously against corporate executives as they will street criminals.
Thank you.
But Ken Lay, now off to plan his appeal, called the message dangerous, making business as usual a crime. Lay and Skilling blame the fall of Enron on the media, on speculators, even on the September 11th attacks. Now they face sentencing this September 11th and potentially the rest of their lives in prison. Campbell?
Thanks, Scott. NBC's Scott Cohen at the Enron trial tonight. So was justice served? Many of the people who bet their life savings on Enron say yes. NBC's Don Teague has reaction from them tonight in the city Enron called home.
It's the day many in Houston waited almost 5 years for.
I think it's about time.
After a 3.5-month trial and a daily circus of cameras and sound bites,
We fought a good fight.
jurors delivered the only verdict Houstonians who gathered at the courthouse would accept. Guilty for the men who led Enron to collapse.
It's amazing to believe the arrogance of some people, to believe that they're above the law.
People in Houston have felt a tremendous amount of pain. And I think there's a bit of vengeance in this justice.
Justice for thousands of Enron employees nationwide whose jobs and more than $2 billion in retirement accounts disappeared seemingly overnight.
It was really an answer to prayer.
In Oregon, Wayne and Kathy Stevens both worked for an Enron subsidiary. They lost 401ks once worth $750,000.
I believe they have been very guilty and have robbed and raped a lot of people of their savings, and they have hurt a lot of lives.
And even though it will be several months before Ken Lay and Jeffrey Skilling are sentenced to potentially long prison terms, former employee Tushar Dhruv thinks he and other employees faced a harsher sentence: sudden poverty.
I would much rather that they should suffer the same or very similar financial hardships that some of us went through, trying to get health insurance that we can afford, trying to get housing and not lose a home.
Many are still hurting in Houston, but today was a major step forward for a city trying to put Enron's past behind it. Don Teague, NBC News, Houston.
President Bush is holding a joint news conference tonight with British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who arrived at the White House this afternoon for talks with the president on troop levels in Iraq. A White House spokesman says Iraq will be topic A at tonight's news conference, but neither Mr. Bush nor Mr. Blair are about to announce troop withdrawals. There will be live coverage of the news conference tonight at 7:30 Eastern on MSNBC on cable and online. Now to Capitol Hill, where late today the Senate passed by a vote of 62 to 36 its immigration reform bill, which has as its core a provision that will offer millions of illegal immigrants a chance at U.S. citizenship. President Bush is very happy with this legislation, but over in the House, Republicans are not. Here's NBC's Chip Reed.
Mr. Smith. The vote followed a two news the Capitol.
The head of the Marine Corps is on his way to Iraq tonight with an extraordinary message for the troops. He is warning them about becoming indifferent to the loss of human life. And there is a new allegation that Marines in Iraq had murdered the innocent. NBC's Pentagon correspondent Jim Miklaszewski joins us now with more on the story. Good evening, Jim.
Good evening, Campbell. The U.S. Marines and military are now investigating two separate incidents in which Marines are accused of killing innocent, unarmed Iraqi civilians.
An update on the state of
Concerned by allegations, tell NBC News that at least one of those Marines has reportedly confessed to the killing of that lone Iraqi. Campbell.
And Mick, I understand some Marines are even more concerned about this one incident than they are about the previous incident where, as you said, as many as 24 civilians may have been killed. Why?
Well, they're especially disturbed because it appears in that case this was a premeditated killing, not carried out in the heat of battle. And General Hagee is on his way to Iraq tonight to instill the message in the Marines that they must adhere to the rule of law in war. Campbell.
All right, thanks very much. Jim Miklaszewski at the Pentagon for us tonight. President Bush stepped into a fight between the Justice Department and Congress today, ordering documents seized by the FBI, which congressional leaders want returned, to be sealed for a 45-day cooling-off period. The documents were taken in a raid on Democratic Congressman William Jefferson's office last Saturday night by FBI agents looking into bribery allegations against him. Congressional leaders of both parties are calling the raid a violation of the Constitution's guarantee of separation of powers. And CNBC Chief Washington Correspondent John Harwood reports tonight that Treasury Secretary John Snow will likely leave his job by the middle of next month. Harwood says the Bush administration has honed in on a successor to Snow, though we don't know who that is yet, and Snow will depart either before or after a G8 finance ministers meeting, which begins June 9th. When NBC Nightly News continues on this Thursday evening, in depth, mortgage rates at their highest levels in 4 years. Why higher rates are causing big financial problems for so many homeowners. And later, Brian Williams with the man who has changed the way so many of us live our lives.
Some number. And that's what this is.
Groundbreaking specials.
Nighttime in Afghanistan.
Expect the people and events that change the world. Everything you expect from America's news leader right in the palm of your hand. NBC News, now on iTunes.
You voted for your favorite American.
NBC News in depth tonight. Housing on the bubble. A new report on existing home sales showed the market slowed last month, but another number is making news: mortgage rates. The average rate on a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage climbed to 6.62% this week, hitting the highest level in nearly 4 years. The overall increase in mortgage rates is hitting some people, especially those with adjustable rate mortgages, very hard. In depth tonight, here's NBC's Ron Mott.
In the suburbs of Dallas, Bridget Edwards comes home.
In a moment, the theft of millions of veterans' personal information, it turns out to be worse than we thought. Nightmare for thousands in the Northeast Corridor today when a power outage brought Amtrak trains to a dead stop on the rails for 2 hours. Power was restored by late morning, but there were delays for the rest of the day. There's a $50,000 reward being offered tonight by the Department of Veterans Affairs and the FBI for information that leads to the recovery of stolen computer equipment that contained personal data on more than 26 million veterans. And members of Congress today demanded answers from the man in charge of the VA, who admitted the massive security breach was even worse than previously thought. Here's NBC's Tom Costello.
As Memorial
Street today, a rally. The Dow gained almost 94 points. The Nasdaq was up 29 points on the day. And an interesting report on climate out tonight, which says the jet streams are shifting, and that is leading deserts in the American Southwest and around the globe to expand, and they're creeping toward heavily populated areas. The report says areas that are already suffering from prolonged drought and fires might get even drier. When we come back, Brian Williams and the man responsible for the next big thing.
I'm a professional.
Tonight, he is the man who gave us the iPod, and before that, personal computers. So is he resting on his laurels or coming up with the next big thing? Brian Williams now with his conversation with Steve Jobs.
If Steve Jobs is synonymous with Apple, then this new glass cube rising up out of the Midtown Manhattan streets is a monument to Steve Jobs.
Is this your Model T? Is this your space program?
This is the best store we've ever built, and I think that it's the state of the art that we know how to do. Like the cube is extremely state-of-the-art use of glass. You know, there's hardly any metal holding it up. It's glass fins holding up glass.
It's not just that this is all his stuff, his company. It's the fact that Steve Jobs helped to bring us many of the icons of American life today, from tiny trash cans to clicking and dragging. The now commonplace language of computers, the hand-to-mouse movements we no longer think about, is a language he helped teach America.
The technology keeps moving and lets us do more and more. We want to bring customers with that and not just leave them using stuff that they could do 5 years ago, but not the stuff that's been invented since then.
Here's one that's absolutely frightening. You know the downside of innovation. The rap on it is the minute you buy an iPod, you got to get the newest iPod.
You know, you keep on innovating, you keep on making better stuff, and if you always want the latest and greatest, then you have to buy a new iPod at least once a year.
That makes this the new center of the universe for those who swear by Apple.
For some people, it just satisfies them at such a almost spiritual level that they become fanatics like the rest of these guys here.
Steve Jobs is a lot of things: iconoclast, salesman, idea man, lover of technology. But that list apparently does not include reflective.
I'm going to ask you to be introspective for a moment. Where do you fit in the American family of thinkers and inventors?
You know, I don't really think that way.
Try it.
Well, you know, I'm a private person, and I think if you do something and it turns out pretty good, then you should go do something else wonderful and not dwell on it for too long. Just figure out what's next.
For now, in a tough business and in a very tough town, this is what's next. That is, until the next thing comes along.
Brian Williams with Steve Jobs. And we want to say congratulations to Brian's daughter Allison on her high school graduation today and wish her good luck as she prepares to go off to college. Brian will be back here tomorrow night, and I'll see you this weekend on Today. That is Nightly News for this Thursday night. For Brian Williams and everyone here at NBC News, have a good night, everybody.
Friday, The Da Vinci Code.
Chet Huntley, David Brinkman, John Chancellor. Tom Brokaw.